She needs to unclasp that thing, or I'll file a non-compliance citation right now. Bra outline or not, we don't make exceptions for teenagers. That's what Burl Kask, lead compliance inspector for the Whisper Glen Residential Council, said in front of 20 families and a potluck table full of lemonade cups. He waved his clipboard at my daughter like he was signaling a security breach, not addressing a 15-year-old girl in a medical compression liner. His voice cut through the chatter under the glass canopy of the Glen Mirror Pavilion, turning it into stunned silence. Lyra froze, her hands clenched at her sides, stiff as marble. She didn't cry. She just stopped moving. Burl took a step forward. We have a clear ordinance. Garments that visually disrupt community standard lines must be removed or unfastened upon request. I'm not going to argue this in front of neighbors. I moved between them. This pavilion receives state-funded beautification grants, I said. That means your demand just triggered federal housing oversight. You want to escalate? Let's escalate. He blinked like he hadn't heard me. But he had. Everyone had. If you're a parent or a human being, or someone who thinks a clipboard doesn't give you permission to violate a child's dignity, pay attention. Subscribe now, because what happened here is happening across neighborhoods like yours, and someone needs to burn it down, legally. I'm Joran Halvik. I design municipal enforcement systems for a living, specifically the kind that regulate quasi-governmental communities like Whisper Glen. I know every loophole, every inspection clause, every dollar trail that turns a neighborhood into a private kingdom. I also know how to dismantle it, if you can stomach what it takes. My daughter and I moved here 6 years ago, thinking it would be safe, quiet, normal. But normal went out the window after last October, when Lyra was followed by a man 3 blocks from her school bus stop. We got a conviction, but trauma doesn't end with a courtroom win. It follows you. It lives in the seams of your clothes and how you prepare to leave the house. Lyra's doctor prescribed a compression liner to help her reclaim control of her own body. So, no, she wasn't out of dress code. She was in survival mode. Burl didn't care. He never cared. His enforcement style isn't about cleanliness, it's about control. And that visual conformity clause he keeps quoting, he pushed it through last year, buried in the back pages of a seasonal rulebook no one reads. I didn't speak again until I heard Lyra's breath start to hiccup. That kind of breath, the kind that wants to cry but can't, is worse than screaming. I looked at him dead on. My daughter's medical exemption is protected under state law. You demand she unclasp anything again, I'll file for civil harassment before this ink dries. Burl narrowed his eyes. You think threatening me makes your violations disappear? No, I said. But I do know what happens when public grant money overlaps with non-compliant rule enforcement. I'm sure HUD would love to audit your citations against minors. That got his attention. He stepped back, just slightly. People were watching, some with curiosity, some with discomfort. One woman covered her kid's ears. Another took out her phone, like she wasn't sure whether to film or pretend nothing was happening. Lyra didn't say a word, but she took one step back. Just one. Her gaze still locked forward. That was enough. I touched her shoulder. We're done, I told him, and we walked. Past the cupcake stand, past the HOA welcome table, past every neighbor pretending this wasn't the ugliest moment they'd seen in this glass-walled shrine to community values. I didn't feel triumphant. I felt hunted, but I knew what to do now. This wasn't just going to be another HOA complaint. This was going to be his last inspection. Burl filed the citation before we even got home. It was waiting in our digital inbox by the time I checked my phone. Violation 4.7, non-conformant visual attire detected on minor resident. Attached was a scanned copy of his handwritten note, the signature line heavy and smug with blue ink. I stared at the screen long enough for the backlight to time out. Lyra was already upstairs. She hadn't spoken in the car. Just stared out the window, the compression liner zipped all the way up to her collarbone like armor. The event had lasted 40 minutes. We'd lasted 25. I sat at the kitchen island, turned the screen horizontal, and read the full citation again. It wasn't just the violation that infuriated me. It was the language. Resident failed to demonstrate correction after instruction. Refusal to comply during on-site remedy guidance. Warning escalated to formal level 2 action. Guidance, that's what he called it. I pulled up the Whisper Glen Enforcement Handbook from the HOA portal. The visual conformity clause was there, buried under a section labeled aesthetic cohesion, with wording so vague it could mean anything. Burrell had used it as a net, and today he'd finally pulled it tight. I checked the revision date. The clause had been added 8 months ago. Unanimous board approval. I clicked through the names. Thess Manderley's signature was one of them, of course. Lyra's door creaked open upstairs, light footsteps across the hallway, then silence again. I didn't go to her, not yet. Instead, I opened my work terminal and dug into the property reports I'd been reviewing last quarter. Something about Whisper Glen's funding struck me as wrong. We'd been conducting grant audits in nearby developments. Whisper Glen wasn't part of that original list, but I remembered seeing their name on an indirect payout chart. It only took a few logins to confirm it. Whisper Glen received an annual neighborhood development grant through the Maricopa Civic Beautification Program. Not much, 18th 200, but enough to force their compliance under public funding rules, which meant Burrell wasn't just issuing a citation on private land. He was operating under the shade of state money. I closed my eyes and breathed once. It was like feeling a lock click from the inside. The front door opened 5 minutes later. My mother walked in, boots quiet on the tile, sunglasses still on. She hadn't called ahead. She never did when it was bad. "Where is she?" she asked. "Upstairs," I said. "Shower." She nodded and dropped her keys into the bowl by the door. "He filed?" I slid the screen across the counter. She read it silently, jaw stiff. Then she scrolled and stopped. "This clause was approved 8 months ago. Board signed off, including Manderley." She scoffed. "Of course she did. Knew she'd break eventually." Algrith Halvik was a retired U.S. Marshal, but you'd never guess it from the quiet way she carried herself. Everything was methodical, movement, tone, speech. But I could see it in her knuckles now, the tension, the twitch. She looked up at me and spoke in the same calm voice she used during her briefings. "This qualifies under Section 213 Sub B of the Arizona Civil Rights Housing Act. Harassment by appearance-based inspection, especially toward minors, is classifiable under discriminatory enforcement, especially if public funds were used to facilitate the space." I was thinking the same. Her eyes narrowed. "You weren't just thinking. You were building." She knew me too well. I nodded. "I started pulling records. We have funding ties. I can draft the complaint by morning." "Do it." I heard the water shut off upstairs. Lyra's door opened again, and this time her footsteps moved toward the stairs. She paused on the bottom step when she saw us. "Grandma," she said. "Hey, sweetheart." My mother's voice softened instantly. She opened her arms. Lyra didn't hesitate. She walked into them and stayed there. My hands curled around the edge of the counter. My daughter had spent years learning to walk through the world without feeling hunted, and in a single moment, Burrell had made her feel unsafe again, in front of an entire neighborhood. He'd turned community into theater, and I wasn't going to let him get away with it, not this time. The HOA building smelled like new carpet and cheap lemon disinfectant. I walked in with a printed copy of the citation in one hand and a folder full of municipal code cross-references in the other. The front desk was empty, except for a short stack of neighborhood bulletins and a half-drunk cup of coffee with lipstick on the rim. Thess Manderley was in the conference room behind the glass wall, her silhouette angled toward the window like she didn't want to be seen. She must have heard the door. Her head turned slightly, just enough to confirm. It was me, and then she froze. I didn't wave. When she finally came out front, she didn't meet my eyes. "Mr. Halvik," she said, smoothing her skirt, voice perfectly neutral. "I assume this is about yesterday." I handed her the citation. "I want a written statement from the board rescinding this notice." She looked down at it. Burrell followed the current interpretation of Ordinance 4.7. "If you'd like to submit an appeal—" "I'm not submitting anything," I said. "You signed this ordinance into effect. I want to know why, and I want it off my daughter's record today." Her hands fidgeted, folding the edge of the paper, even though she wasn't aware of it. "The clause was part of last year's seasonal update," she said carefully. "It passed unanimously. It wasn't meant for minors. The language was ambiguous." "No," I said. "It was vague enough to protect you, not her." For a second, just a flicker, something cracked through her boardroom expression. Shame. Not much, but enough. I pressed forward. "You've seen him do this before, haven't you?" "Burrell." You've watched him enforce it. Her jaw moved like she was chewing glass. He takes initiative. I leaned in slightly. Tell me, Ms. Manderley, when he issued citations for visible garment outlines last fall, did any of those go to residents over the age of 20? She didn't answer. That's what I thought. The silence between us stretched tight. Through the glass, I could see Burrell's white sedan pulling into the parking lot. The man was never late for anything except accountability. Thess caught the movement too. She stepped sideways, out of the window's view. I didn't know about Lyra's condition. If I had... You'd have stopped him? I asked. Her lips parted, but no words came out. I didn't need them. I know about the grant money, I said. The Civic Beautification Program payout? That makes your inspection subject to state housing code, especially if your clause is targeting minors. I'm filing complaints. EUD, Civil Rights Division. And if I have to, I'll call in my mother. That last part wasn't a threat. It was a fact. Thess paled. You still have a choice, I added. You can stay on the wrong side of this and wait for it to catch fire, or you can be the one who finally says no. You signed the clause. You can speak to its misuse. She looked down at the citation again. Burrell won't go quietly. He never does, I said. I turned to leave, but her voice stopped me. There were others. I looked over my shoulder. Thess swallowed. You're not the first. He filed citations against 3 other families with teen daughters over the past 6 months. They didn't escalate, they just left. Now the shape of it was clear. Burrell hadn't just weaponized HOA policy. He'd been running a quiet campaign of forced attrition. Driving families out before, they knew how to push back. I nodded slowly. Write that down, affidavit, sign it. She didn't argue. I walked out as Burrell came through the front entrance. He didn't acknowledge me, just brushed past with the stiffness of someone clinging to rules he no longer fully controlled. I didn't speak to him. Not yet. Outside, the sun had gone high and hard. My car was burning hot when I opened the door. But I didn't care. The air inside smelled like paper and heat and a fight I was finally going to win. Because now, I wasn't the only one who'd seen it. 2 days later, Burrell doubled down. A new memo landed in everyone's mailbox. Crisp, folded in thirds, Whisper Glen's logo printed in soft gold at the top like it made the words beneath more legitimate. The subject line, Clarification of Enforcement Protocol regarding Visual Conformity Ordinance 4.7. It was a PR attempt masquerading as policy. The language had been softened, reworded with just enough legal padding to pretend none of what happened with Lyra was improper. But it was clear. Burrell wasn't retreating. He was cementing his position. By the time I finished reading the first paragraph, my fists were tight enough to crack the paper. I watched neighbors pick up the memo from their porches that afternoon. Some read it with furrowed brows. Others didn't even open it. 2 teen girls walked past the pavilion in oversized sweatshirts despite the 93-degree heat. They looked straight ahead and moved faster when they saw Burrell's car parked nearby. That night, Lyra stayed in her room. She hadn't gone outside since the incident. Not even to the porch swing she used to sit on for hours. I sat on the edge of the couch, the memo spread out across the coffee table, and stared at the phrasing. Enforcement officers are authorized to request in situ correction of clothing-based disruptions to community aesthetics when such disruptions are objectively visible and documented in writing. He wasn't just tightening the noose. He was making sure no one could say he hadn't warned them. You see what he's doing, right? I asked my mother without looking up. Algrith stood at the kitchen counter behind me, stirring her tea like she was waiting for an excuse to storm the HOA office herself. He's laundering the rule, she said. Wants to show any oversight board that he gave advance notice. So when he pulls it again, he claims it wasn't personal. I nodded slowly. And if someone refuses? He files another violation, starts a penalty chain, makes it too expensive to fight. I looked toward Lyra's door. It's already costing us. She walked into the room a few minutes later, silent and pale. She moved past me without a word and sat on the floor beside the coffee table, cross-legged like she was 10 again. Her hands rested on her knees, calm, too calm. Can I read it? She asked. I passed her the memo. She didn't blink as she read it, just nodded once at the end and set it down. You're going to fix this, right? It wasn't a question. Not exactly. It was more like something she was saying out loud to stop herself from breaking. "I am," I said. She got up and walked back to her room without another word. And just like that, everything clicked into place. This wasn't a one-time abuse. This was strategy. It wasn't just about Lyra anymore. It was about who got to feel safe here and who didn't. I called the City Records Division the next morning and submitted a request for all budget disbursement documents related to Whisper Glen's public grants. I didn't need to dig through files or sneak into back rooms. I knew the system. I used the state's transparency portal, keyed in the civic grant code, and watched the automated delivery notice confirm. Your records will be emailed within 24 hours. Then I called the Arizona Civil Housing Enforcement Unit and scheduled a consult. I told them what I had, I told them what he did, and I told them what was coming next. They didn't laugh me off. They listened. They took down the grant ID and asked if I had names of affected residents. I gave them 3, not just Lyra, but the other families Thess had mentioned. I didn't know if those parents would talk, but now there was a case forming, not just a complaint. That evening, I walked to the pavilion alone. I stood where Burl had humiliated my daughter and took photos from 5 different angles. Every sign, every bench, every lighting fixture the grant money had paid for. Then, I turned the camera on myself, and I recorded a statement. Not for social media, not yet, just for the record, in case anyone tried to rewrite what happened again. The email arrived at 4:43 a.m. Subject: Disbursement Report. Whisper Glen. Residential Council, Civic Beautification Grant. I was already awake, staring at the ceiling with too many thoughts stacked against each other like a traffic jam. I rolled out of bed and opened the laptop on the dining table, every light still off in the house except the screen's glow. There it was, line item 12 on the quarterly breakdown. Event Pavilion Maintenance, $6,500 funded through Maricopa County CBDG allocation. Right below it, Exterior Environment Oversight Enforcement, $3,000 flagged for compliance audit, unresolved. I read it again, and again. They had used public grant money, federal funds channeled through state programs, to partially cover Burl's job. That was the break. If his inspections were even partially funded through government disbursements, then everything he did was subject to state civil code and federal conduct laws. His citations weren't just overreach. They were violations of Title 24 and Arizona housing enforcement protocols. And now I had the paper trail. I highlighted the relevant entries, built a PDF package, and labeled every file with timestamps. Then I uploaded them to the HUD complaint portal. Under the Civil Rights Division intake form, I added the witness reference, the citation copy, and the language from his memo. It took 3 hours to build the file the way I wanted it. By the time the sun rose, I was back at the table, coffee in hand, rereading every line. At 7:21, my mother walked in. "You look like you haven't slept," she said. I didn't. She sipped her tea and sat across from me. "Is it done?" "It's submitted. HUD has it. The State Enforcement Board has it. I included the pavilion maintenance clause, the inspection funding note, everything." She glanced at the screen. "You use their formatting. They'll take it seriously." She nodded once and leaned back in her chair. "Good." I didn't say it out loud, but I could feel something shift in the house. Something quiet, but different. Lyra came down not long after. She saw the laptop, saw the files still open, and didn't ask what they were. She just sat beside me and picked up her juice. "You think he knows yet?" she asked. "Not yet," I said, "but he will." That afternoon, Burl started making rounds again. I saw him out the window, clipboard in hand, walking the sidewalk like nothing had changed. Same slow steps, same pause at each mailbox. But he wasn't knocking, he was just being seen, which meant he was rattled. I stepped outside when he reached our end of the street. He didn't look at me, but his steps slowed when he saw me standing on the porch. "You left something out of your memo," I said. He stopped, half-turned. "Your ordinance applies to all residents, right?" I asked. He didn't answer. "Because I checked. And in the last 6 months, every single citation for 4.7 was issued to a female under 20. No adult men, no seniors, no boys." His jaw clenched. "And now that I know part of your position is funded through state-channeled HUD money, that's not just selective enforcement. It's discriminatory pattern enforcement under the Fair Housing Act." He opened his mouth, then shut it again. I sent the files, I said. Everything, including your memo, including the photos. You'll hear from them soon. He stared at me for a long moment, then gave a short, bitter breath and kept walking. But his steps were heavier. That night, I printed every file again. Not because I needed them in paper, but because there was something final about holding the weight of evidence in your hands. I placed the folder in the drawer beneath the kitchen phone, not as backup, as the beginning of the end. Lyra didn't come downstairs the next morning. Her bedroom door was closed, the light still off beneath it, but I could hear movement. Soft, uneven pacing. Every once in a while, the floor creaked. I didn't knock. I knew that rhythm. It wasn't the kind that wanted company. It was the kind trying to hold itself together. I turned back to my computer and reopened the confirmation email from HUD. Complaint submission received. Reference number AZCRD7684. It was official now. The state enforcement team had jurisdiction. My part was to keep gathering, quietly, steadily, until they moved. The front gate buzzed around 10:12 a.m. I looked at the screen on the wall. Thess. I opened the door and let her in without a word. She stepped inside cautiously, like she wasn't sure if I'd slam the door on her. Her hands clutched a manila envelope, her mouth set in a line that hadn't relaxed since the day I confronted her at the office. I brought the memos, she said. The original drafts, the board minutes, you'll want these. I took the envelope and opened it at the kitchen counter. Inside were 5 printed pages and a USB drive. Each memo had annotations in her handwriting, circled dates, highlighted clauses, notes that showed who proposed which parts of the policy. Burrell's name appeared on every page. "What made you change your mind?" I asked. She hesitated. "I watched my granddaughter cry yesterday when her mom told her she had to wear a jacket to the park." I looked up. "She's 9, Thess said, "and she's already afraid of being cited." The silence between us felt heavier than the folder in my hands. "I didn't know Burrell would weaponize it like this," she continued. "At first, it was supposed to be about garish clothes, loud patterns. We just wanted order, but then he started adding the enforcement footnotes, and no one stopped him." "You could have," I said. Her face tightened. "I know." I nodded and turned toward the printer. I scanned the pages one by one and saved them to the folder I'd built for the complaint. I made 2 extra copies, just in case. When I looked back, Thess was watching me, not with regret anymore, but something else. Resignation. "Do you think they'll remove him?" she asked quietly. "If they don't, someone higher will." She nodded again and started for the door. But before she left, she turned back and placed a smaller piece of paper on the table, a sticky note. 3 names, she said. Parents whose daughters got cited before. They didn't fight it, but they might talk to you. I watched her walk back down the driveway without looking back. Once she was gone, I sat down and stared at the note. 3 names. One was familiar, Jessica Rames. Her family had moved out 4 months ago. I remembered their "for sale" sign going up quickly. The others were still here. I called the first number, no answer. The second one picked up. "This is Layla," the woman said. "Hi, my name is Joran Halvik. I'm calling about something that happened with my daughter recently, and I believe it may have happened to your daughter too." There was a pause. Then, "You're the one who stood up to Burrell at the pavilion." "Yes." Another pause. Then a long exhale. "I didn't think anyone else would say anything," she said. I kept my voice steady. "Would you be willing to speak to the housing board, even anonymously?" Silence again. Then, "Yes, just tell me what you need." I hung up, added her name to the affidavit prep file, and leaned back in the chair. My eyes burned, but I didn't close them. I had what I needed now: witnesses, policy drafts, board signatures, proof of pattern. And the last piece, the moment that tipped it all, was walking toward me down the stairs. Lyra stood in her hoodie, jaw set, gaze steady. Her hair was pulled back, and her eyes didn't look fogged with fear anymore. "I'm ready to come with you," she said. I didn't ask where she meant. I just nodded. We met Layla Torres at the old trailhead behind the Whisper Glen tennis courts, neutral ground, far enough from the main streets and the HOA cameras. It was early evening, just before dusk, the sky gold-flecked and low. Lyra stayed in the car, windows cracked, sketchpad in her lap. Layla looked younger than I expected, early 30s, sharp eyes. Her daughter Mia sat beside her in the back seat, legs drawn up, earbuds in. She couldn't have been older than 13. I never told anyone the full story, Layla said, leaning against her driver's side door. Not even the realtor when we put the house up for sale. I held the affidavit forms in my hand, but didn't offer them yet. He came to our door, she continued, voice low. Burl, clipboard in hand, said Mia's swim shirt was too tight, that it showed outlines. She'd just come back from the pool, for God's sake. I didn't interrupt, let the words come. He said if she didn't change immediately and allow inspection next time, he'd issue a fine. He used the word inspection, like this was a military base. Her voice cracked a little there, but she swallowed it down. He didn't touch her? I asked gently. No, but he looked at her like she wasn't a kid, like she was some problem he was going to fix. That's when I knew we couldn't stay. Did you file anything? We tried, went to the board. Thess was there. She looked embarrassed, but didn't say much. And Burl spun it like he always does. Policy enforcement, visual compliance. We didn't have the energy to fight him. We just left. I nodded. You're not alone. Others are coming forward. HUD has the complaint now. But your statement, your daughter's experience, could be pivotal. Layla looked toward her car. I don't want her to go through this again. She's only just started sleeping without the light on. She doesn't have to testify, just your statement, if you're comfortable signing. She stared at the form in my hand. After a moment, she took it, glanced through it, then pulled a pen from her bag and signed at the bottom. Her signature was swift and final. She handed it back. Do what needs to be done. I thanked her and watched as she got back in her car and drove off, headlights blinking on in the dimming light. I returned to my car. Lyra looked up from her sketch pad. That was her? I nodded. She was brave. Lyra didn't say anything for a moment. Then, how many are there now? 3 parents, 4 kids total. Thess is giving me board meeting logs. We're close. She gave a small nod, then went back to her drawing. That night, back at home, I scanned Layla's signed affidavit and added it to the complaint packet. Each file made the folder heavier, not in megabytes, but in gravity. Then I opened the USB stick Thess had given me. It held minutes from 5 board meetings, going back over a year. Burl had pushed for expanded inspection privileges in 2 of them. In one, he'd suggested an amendment that allowed discretionary garment correction requests, a phrase vague enough to be twisted into exactly what he'd tried with Lyra. And there it was, in Thess's handwriting in the margin beside that line. How will this be enforced for minors? Under it, no answer. I highlighted that section, extracted it, and added it to the HUD supplement folder with the timestamp. Then I emailed the compliance officer I'd spoken to earlier that week. Attached, affidavit, board minutes, inspection memos, policy drafts, funding receipts. Subject, updated evidence, pattern discrimination under Ordinance 4.7. I sent it, sat back, and exhaled for the first time in hours. The house was quiet. My mother was asleep. Lyra's door was cracked just enough that I could hear the hum of her bedside lamp. I walked past, glanced inside. She was sitting up, sketchpad beside her, eyes open but calm. She looked at me. You still writing all of it down? She asked. Every word. She nodded once and turned off her light. Tomorrow, I'd contact the second name on the list Thess had given me. But tonight, I just stood in the hallway for a moment longer, feeling the shift under my feet, the kind that comes before something breaks open. I found the second name from Thess's list that afternoon, Vanessa Tren, a nurse practitioner who lived 2 blocks over near the East Gate. Her house had always been quiet, garden trimmed to HOA specs, no visible trouble. But the moment I rang the bell, she opened the door like she'd been waiting for someone to finally ask. You're the Halvik guy, right? The one who stood up to Burl? I nodded. She didn't even hesitate. Come in. Her living room was small, clean, and felt like it had held too many long silences. A girl's backpack sat on the edge of the couch, half-zipped. An untouched textbook splayed open on the coffee table. On the mantel was a framed photo of her daughter, around 14, tall, smiling under a sun hat. Darian's with her grandparents right now, Vanessa said, pouring tea she didn't seem to need. I had to get her out for a few weeks. She was starting to panic every time she saw his car. She handed me the tea and sat across from me. He cited her? I asked. Twice, she said. First time was during spring break. She was in a long shirt, headed to the mailbox. He claimed it was a form distortion issue. I thought it was absurd. But then a week later, he caught her coming out of my car after soccer practice, issued another citation for visual disruption via outerwear tightness. It was a team hoodie. I didn't interrupt. Vanessa set her cup down. I work trauma. I've seen what harassment looks like when it's dressed up in language. He knew exactly what he was doing, so I started documenting. I raised my eyebrows. She reached under the couch cushion and pulled out a file folder, thick with printed screenshots, photos, and a spreadsheet I didn't recognize. I logged every time I saw his car idle on our street. Time, date, weather. I matched it to citations posted. I found a pattern. He only patrolled during school dismissal hours and weekend late mornings, times when teens are most likely outside. 92% of the residents cited were girls under 18. I flipped through the spreadsheet. It was meticulous and damning. You need to send this to HUD, I said. They already have 3 affidavits in the board meeting minutes. I will, she said, but I want it to come from me. She stood, walked to a drawer, and pulled out an envelope. Inside was a signed affidavit. She'd already filled it out. I was waiting for someone to fight him. Now you're here, and I'm ready. I took it. Outside, the clouds had shifted, gray bleeding into the gold of late afternoon. It smelled like static. That edge of weather about to change. I drove straight to the city branch office and scanned everything at the secure kiosk. Then I emailed the files directly to the enforcement officer handling our case. By the time I got home, I found Lyra at the kitchen table with my mother, a map of the neighborhood spread between them. What's this? I asked. Lyra looked up. We're marking the spots, where he patrols, where the cameras are, where he stops most often. I glanced at the map. It matched Vanessa's data. We're building a timeline, she said, calm and steady. For the hearing. My mother smiled faintly, proud in that quiet, steel-edged way she had. She's got your eyes for detail. I took a seat beside them and started pointing. He always loops past the pavilion twice before hitting the south row, but he never stops on Hemmings Court. It's a blind curve, no camera coverage. Probably uses it to sit undetected, Lyra said. We outlined it. We kept going for another hour, marking every pattern we'd seen, matching it to Vanessa's data. We didn't have a search warrant. We didn't need one. We had public street patterns, HOA patrol logs, and enough testimonials to back every mark we drew. When we were done, the map looked like a battle plan. Because it was. Burl had built his power on shadows, on silence, on people assuming they were alone. Now we had the paper trail. Now we had the timeline. Now we had each other. And that was more than enough to tip it. I spent the next day preparing the final stage. The documentation was airtight now. Vanessa's spreadsheet, Layla's affidavit, Thess's board notes, all merged into a single organized case file with cross-references and timestamps. I printed 2 physical copies, one for the enforcement hearing and one to deliver by hand to the Civil Housing Review Board downtown. The rest, I backed up 3 ways: external drive, cloud folder, and encrypted local storage. In the afternoon, I called the HUD liaison. Her name was June Levin, and she answered with a tone that told me she already recognized the case. Mr. Halvik, we've reviewed the initial packet, she said. Your documentation suggests a pattern consistent with targeted enforcement. We've initiated a preliminary inquiry under Section 3604 of the Fair Housing Act. I kept my voice even. Do you need further affidavits? We'll accept them, but your 3 signed ones and the annotated board documents are already compelling. The state enforcement rep will attend the community hearing this Friday. We've advised them to observe, not intervene, yet. That's more than enough. She paused. You should know. It's rare to see this level of preparation on a first filing. Your complaint reads like it came from inside the system. I used to write state compliance audits. Ah, she said, and I could almost hear her smile. After the call, I turned my attention to the final preparation. Timing. Burl had become unpredictable. I hadn't seen his car for 2 days, but I knew he wasn't gone. People like him don't retreat, they reposition. And if the board was nervous, which I suspected they were, they'd be warning him to lay low until the storm passed. I didn't need him to act, I just needed him to appear. So I submitted a work order through the HOA portal. Maintenance request, streetlight flickering at Pavilion Northwest Post. It was fake, but not technically. The light was dim on overcast days, enough to justify a daytime inspection, and the moment it was processed, it triggered the automatic routing system, assigning Burl as head of exterior inspection to verify. I knew the system. I'd helped design its earliest prototype 4 years ago in a different county. They hadn't changed the back end. It was still timestamp driven, still logged. I watched the job ticket go live. Scheduled inspection, Thursday, 9 a.m. perfect. That night, I asked Lyra to pack a bag. Just some basics, I said. You won't be gone long. Why? She asked. Because tomorrow morning, I want you to be somewhere safe. Your face won't be part of what happens next. She studied me for a moment, then nodded. My mother had already prepped a space at her old friend's cabin up near the pass. No signal, no HOA, no reason to think about anything but quiet trees and warm tea. Lyra left just after sunrise with my mother behind the wheel. I stood at the end of the driveway and watched the car disappear around the bend. Then I walked back inside and zipped up the portfolio. Everything was ready. At exactly 9:03 a.m., I saw Burl's car turn into the pavilion lot. He stepped out alone, clipboard in hand, sunglasses on. I hit record on the discreet body cam I'd affixed to my chest under a zip-up vest. Then I walked out my door and made my way toward the pavilion. He didn't see me until I was 10 feet away. I watched his face shift when he recognized me, smugness tightening into wary calculation. Streetlight, I said casually, nodding toward the post he was inspecting. He gave a short grunt, writing something down. Glad to see you're still making rounds, I added. I was worried you'd disappeared. He looked up then. Still within my duties. I smiled, but there was no warmth in it. Not for long. He frowned. Excuse me? I held up a single folder. This is every file, every pattern, every false citation, every affidavit. Burl's eyes narrowed. I didn't move. Friday, community hearing. You'll want to wear something sharp. Then I turned and walked away, leaving him standing under the very light he claimed was broken. Let him stew in it, because the next time we'd meet, it wouldn't be a warning. It would be the reckoning. The hearing notice went out that evening, printed on thick cream-colored cardstock, like it was announcing a charity gala instead of a procedural reckoning. Special session, community policy review, Whisper Glen Residential Council, Friday, 5 p.m. Glen Mirror Pavilion. No details, no explanation, just a bland invitation to what was about to become the most consequential moment in this neighborhood's history. By morning, everyone had a copy on their porch. I didn't sleep much that night. I went over the case file again, not because I needed to, it was complete, but because ritual matters. Every page I touched, every citation I reread, every note from Layla or Vanessa or Thess, it all solidified something in me. I wasn't walking into that hearing for revenge. I was walking in so no other parent would have to go through what we did. By noon, I was in my garage packing equipment. Nothing covert, just 2 tripods, a handheld mic, and my portable dock camera. Whisper Glen's HOA bylaws allowed video coverage for open meetings, as long as no one was recorded in private spaces, and the equipment didn't obstruct walkways. I'd memorized that clause. Burl had used it once to stop a father from filming a landscaping dispute. Now it would work against him. By 3 p.m., I saw the first signs of panic. 2 board members, Howard Drell and Maggie Lynn, met in the HOA office, speaking in tight, clipped motions. Howard waved a folder in her face. Maggie kept shaking her head. Neither of them noticed me watching from the sidewalk across the street. At 4:12 p.m., a whisper started circulating in the neighborhood group chat. Is this about the Halvik girl? By 4:45, it wasn't a question anymore. Screenshots of the memo, the 4.7 ordinance, and snippets of Layla's account were all over the resident forum. Someone had leaked the hearing's real purpose. It wasn't me. That told me the board was fracturing. At 5 p.m., the sun dipped low enough to turn the sky amber. I changed into a collared shirt, zipped my vest over it, and slipped the body cam into place. No more evidence needed. Just presence. This was the final step. At 5:30, I arrived at the Glen Mirror Pavilion. Thess was already there, stacking forms on the folding table near the entrance. She saw me, gave a single nod, and returned to arranging name placards. The board was taking this seriously. Good. By 5:45, the crowd started forming. Neighbors I hadn't spoken to in years, teenagers standing beside their parents, even a few families I didn't recognize, probably invited by those who'd left Whisper Glen after Burrell's citations. Burrell arrived last, of course. Black slacks, navy blazer, clipboard tucked under one arm, like always. He walked in like he still believed the room was his, like he could bluff his way through anything with the right paragraph and enough signatures. The moment he saw me standing by the front row, something flickered behind his eyes. Uncertainty. The board took their places at the long table up front. Thess sat near the end, not at the center like usual. That seat remained conspicuously empty. Howard Drell stood. We've called this special session to review procedural complaints regarding enforcement practices, he said, particularly those concerning Ordinance 4.7 and its recent applications. He looked over the crowd and tried to smile. This is a non-litigious hearing, open to all residents. Please respect the format. Anyone who wishes to speak must use the provided form and approach the mic when called. He didn't look at me directly, but he didn't need to. I already had the first speaking slot. I walked forward, placed my folder on the table beside the mic, and opened it. This isn't just about one ordinance, I said. It's about how power is used when no one's watching, and what happens when someone finally does. Banned, then I began. I laid it out, clear, precise, irrefutable. The funding records, the memo language, the patrol schedules, the 3 affidavits, the board minutes Thess had annotated, the video stills from the pavilion, everything. By the time I stepped back, no one was whispering anymore. No one was shifting in their seats, because they all knew. This wasn't policy. This was a pattern. It didn't take long after I sat down for the room to turn. The silence that followed my presentation the mic wasn't the kind that comes from confusion. It was the silence that comes from calculation. Dozens of people quietly reevaluating everything they thought was normal. Parents looked at their daughters. Board members looked at each other. The teenager in the second row shifted uncomfortably and pulled her sweatshirt sleeves down to her wrists. And Burl Cask, still standing off to the side of the stage, arms folded across his chest, finally looked unsure. Howard Drell cleared his throat, too loud through the speakers. "Thank you, Mr. Halvik," he said stiffly. "That's quite a bit of material." "It's evidence," I replied. "If anyone else would like to speak, I believe that mic still works." He didn't respond. No one did. For 10 seconds, the whole room just waited. Then Thess stood up. Not from the front table. She didn't need the mic. She spoke from where she sat in the row behind mine, voice clear, hands steady on her lap. "I was on the board when Ordinance 4.7 was approved," she said. "I regret that vote. I signed it thinking we were preserving standards. I now know it was used as a weapon, against minors, against families. I'm prepared to testify to that in any forum this community or the state deems appropriate." Howard looked like he'd swallowed a nail. He glanced at Maggie Lynn, who was staring hard at the surface of the table, like if she looked up, she'd shatter. No one interrupted Thess. No one could. Burl moved then, not to the mic. He walked straight to the board table and dropped his clipboard with a loud, deliberate slap. "This is ridiculous," he said. The room stirred. "I've followed every procedure this board has laid out. Every citation I issued was based on written policy. Visual conformity wasn't my idea. It was a board-approved amendment. If anyone here thinks I acted outside that authority, they're wrong." "You enforced it only on girls," someone called out from the back. Burl's head snapped toward the voice, but he didn't respond. "You enforced it on children," someone else added. Now the room was shifting, people murmuring, turning to their neighbors. More voices, not louder, but unified. Howard tapped his folder and tried to regain control. "We're not here for a trial." "Then why are we here?" Layla Torres stood up from the side row. "You've known what this man's been doing, the memos, the citations. I brought mine straight to your office. You buried it." Howard's mouth opened, closed. "And you," Layla turned to Burl, "you told my daughter, my 12-year-old daughter, that her sports bra created shape pollution. That was the term you used. My husband wanted to take a bat to your car." "Your husband should have better manners," Burl snapped. That did it. There was a collective inhale from the crowd, sharp, instant, and dangerous. I stood again. "Enough." Everyone turned. "This meeting isn't about arguing. It's about accountability. Burl's pattern is clear. The grant money used to fund his position exposes this board to civil liability. The state has already begun inquiry proceedings. I've submitted 5 affidavits. 3 others are pending. A federal investigator will be following up. Burrell went pale. Howard sat down hard, rubbing his forehead. I stepped forward again. You have a choice right now. You can protect him and invite a class action lawsuit on every one of your names. Or you can do what should have been done months ago. Maggie Lynn finally spoke, voice flat. Motion to suspend Burrell Cask from all duties pending state and federal investigation. Seconded, Thess said. Vote, Maggie said, without looking at anyone. One by one, hands rose around the board table. All but Burrell's. He didn't even protest. He just stood there, a man who finally saw the hole he'd dug deep enough to bury himself in. The motion passed. Someone clapped, then another and another. Not raucous, just steady. Tired relief. The kind of applause you get after coming up for air. I didn't move, not yet. Because this wasn't the victory, not yet. This was the sound of the wall cracking. The victory was what came after. Burrell didn't return to the neighborhood after that night. The next morning, his name was scrubbed from the HOA website. His office key was revoked. His car never reappeared. And the inspection schedule tab on the portal led to a blank page. No official statement. No apology. Just silence, the kind that only follows a resignation given under duress. The state enforcement officer arrived 3 days later. Clipboard, badge, camera. No small talk. She interviewed Thess for an hour in the community library while I waited outside with Lyra, who sat beside me on the bench near the pavilion, the same spot where everything began. They're going to erase the whole thing, aren't they? She asked, chin resting on her knees. No, I said. They're going to replace it. And they did. 2 weeks after the hearing, Ordinance 4.7 was formally rescinded by a unanimous board vote. The language wasn't softened, amended, or relocated. It was removed completely. Whisper Glen's enforcement manual now included a statement barring any clothing-based inspections of minors, with a clear clause requiring parental notification before any community member engages a child. But the bigger change was the sign. They placed it just beneath the glass of the pavilion's eastern archway. A new plaque mounted where the old event calendar used to hang. This space is protected by state and federal civil rights law. Harassment, targeting, or profiling of any resident, especially minors, will result in immediate investigation and administrative referral. Below that, etched in steel, were the names of the families who testified, ours included. Lyra didn't say much when she saw it. She didn't have to. She ran her fingers along the metal and stood there for a while, the sun warming her shoulders, the wind tugging at the ends of her sleeves. Her face was calm. That was enough. Thess stepped down from the board quietly, citing the need to listen more than lead. Her resignation letter included an apology, not just for her role in passing the clause, but for her silence after it started hurting people. Some residents forgave her, others didn't. But she showed up at the next community vote and cast her ballot like everyone else. Layla and Vanessa joined the new ethics committee, which the board was now required to staff. They review all proposed ordinances before they go to vote. Everyone. And me? I declined when asked to join the board. I didn't want power. I just wanted accountability, so I took a different role. I now consult with nearby HOAs that have reported similar issues. I've helped 5 families in 3 different communities file their first complaints. Not everyone ends like ours, but more are starting to. As for Burrell, the last I heard, he'd applied for a similar position in a private development across the county line. But the state's civil enforcement record flagged his application, and the community rejected his candidacy within a week. Whisper Glen got quiet again. Not the silence of fear, but the kind you can live in. Lyra goes to the park now without flinching. She wears what she wants, her compression liner when she needs it, a hoodie when she doesn't. Sometimes just a plain t-shirt and jeans like a teenager should. And I sit in the shade across from her and watch her laugh again, the way she used to before someone thought their clipboard was more important than her dignity. If this story did anything for you, if it made your stomach turn, or your hands clench, or your thoughts go to the person in your life who needs protection, you need to know, this is bigger than our street. HOAs across the country are quietly using ambiguity as authority, but the law is still the law, and families still have power. You just have to use it. Subscribe now, because there's a story like this waiting in every zip code, and the next time someone says it's just policy, you'll know what to do.